So the more that I speak with friends, clients, and family back in Western Europe and North America, do I appreciate how relatively free the last year has been for me here in Ukraine. So in today's Tip Thursday with me, Conor Klein, I'm going to dive into the 3 life lessons about freedom that I've learned by living in Ukraine for the last year. Поехали! Let me start by explaining the actual situation that we had here in Ukraine in 2020 and 2021 with the COVID restrictions. Now back when it started, so early spring 2020, there was about 2 or 3 weeks, if I remember correctly, the length of time where there were some lockdown measures. Basically, you're gonna get takeout here in Ukraine. I was in Odessa. That was quite restrictive for me personally, because I like to eat out basically 3 times a day. Occasionally I cook or someone cooks for me at home, and you have to wear masks to go into places, and by and large those rules were respected. Now after that period, well, first of all they opened everything up and then they tried to reintroduce restrictions. In general, after that period, even when there have been restrictions here in Ukraine, more or less been ignored to a large extent. So, for example, they had a general lockdown in theory a couple of months ago when it was the Orthodox New Year, and most of my favorite places in Odessa were actually open secretly, so you could go in. So it was a little bit annoying that obviously you had to know the places, which in my case is not a problem. So if you come as a tourist, you might not have known where to go. But besides that, there wasn't really any great difference compared to normal life. And that's because rule of law is pretty weak here in Ukraine. Interestingly, when we compare Ukraine to neighboring Belarus, in Belarus, they have very strict rule of law, but the government there has not introduced widespread lockdown measures. So the reason why that country was more relatively free and you could go to bars and shops and clubs and whatnot is because the government just didn't introduce a full lockdown. But they have introduced some measures about wearing masks. In Belarus, for example, you do have to wear masks in a lot more places than you do here in Ukraine at the moment in reality. And if Lukashenko were to decide tomorrow that suddenly everything needs to be locked down, believe me, everything will be locked down and you won't be able to go into secret places so easily like you can in Ukraine. So that is something to bear in mind if you want to escape to Belarus, because if there is a change in policy, it will be very, very strictly enforced. So that is basically, the lesson I learned is about rule of law. And, normally it's a good thing, but when the government takes away your freedom, then obviously living in a country without so strict rule law becomes a lot more attractive. This is to celebrate the end of the coronavirus lockdown and having some nice parties this summer in Odessa, Mama. Woo! So the second lesson that I've learned in the last year, kind of been reinforced, I guess, to me, I had learned it in the past, is the fickleness of our freedoms, our relative freedoms, because this is one you're going to relate to. Obviously we went from a situation where we could walk around and meet people, hug them, not have to wear masks, or sit at home for weeks on end and order takeout, or go just to, or cook at home because we have to go to the supermarket and we don't have any options to go out and socialize. And that disappeared extremely quickly, and a lot of parts of the West it hasn't been returned 100%. Now here, I wasn't disturbed by too much, as I said, lost it for a couple of weeks really, and then gradually we started to regain it. So what has reinforced it more to me is the memories of obviously what happened here in 2014 during the Euromaidan revolution, also known as the Revolution of Dignity here in Ukraine, where obviously there was a change in power. And very quickly afterwards, Russia annexed Crimea, and then a war started in Donbass. And I used to go to Crimea every summer, and I took that for granted because we had visa-free here in Ukraine as a European or as a Westerner. And then suddenly going to Crimea, for example, Russia says it's theirs, they de facto control it, they say I need a Russian visa to go there, and they create all these barriers. That freedom just to go to Crimea is gone. Also Donbass, obviously the war started in 2014, and I cannot go to the city of Donetsk without taking huge personal risk. And I went to Donetsk a few times. Not going to say it was my favorite city in Ukraine, but I still had a good time and I have good memories of being there. And can't do that anymore. And it's a shell, and more than figuratively, of what it used to be. I remember flying into that airport, the one that's been completely destroyed. It was a new airport at the time. So if you'd asked most people here in Ukraine back in the summer of 2013, will there be a war between Russia and Ukraine? They say you're crazy. Why would it be a war, brother countries? Now, obviously, people who understood the dynamics, geopolitical dynamics, could foresee that there was potential for some conflict, but just so quickly it all turned. And you probably can relate to that quite a bit with these COVID restrictions. So the fickleness of freedom is something that innately we don't appreciate it until we've lost it. So the third and final life lesson that this year in Ukraine has taught me is about political correctness and the value in terms of freedom of speech, because that is something that we've seen severely curtailed in the West, whether it happens to be here on YouTube, but having an open and intellectual debate around the value of the COVID restrictions, how dangerous COVID is, what the government should be doing, and obviously a lot of people have been cancelled. That extends further. It's been a trend in the West in general. Now, the opposite side is that people say a lot of speech that is unpleasant to hear and can be also hateful, but here you have definitely a more open, active debate. And I'm not going to say that Ukraine doesn't have any sort of cancel culture, and the president basically had 3 supposedly pro-Russian TV stations and media banned here, basically had their licenses withdrawn recently. So it does happen, but that's not going to affect you. And I think that's the real message I want to communicate, is that for you as a foreigner coming here to Ukraine, you can definitely have more freedom of expression, ironically, than what's most likely back in your home country. That's something I really value. So there you've gotten my musings on what is freedom here in Ukraine compared to Western countries, especially in the times of the COVID restrictions 2020, 2021. Now, you watched to the end of this video, so probably a move to Ukraine is something that is tempting you to rediscover that sense of freedom, that relative freedom that I've been enjoying here in Ukraine. And you're going to need to have a plan in place if you want to do that. It doesn't mean you have to move the entire year. I had a consulting client on the phone the other day, and he was considering coming here for, say, the summer months. You need a plan in place to stay longer than that visa-free 90 days. And best way to do that is through my Slavic Utopia Secrets Ukraine high-level consultation group. Down below, there is a link to it. It's on demand. You can join that group. What we're going to go into is designing the optimal visa strategy for you so that you can stay here for as long as you want in Ukraine once you get in. How to take advantage of the massive opportunities in the real estate market, and dive deep into the local real estate market, because it is pretty amazing here what you can get in terms of value for money. So it could be the dream Kiev penthouse overlooking the river Dnipro. It can actually also be here in Dnipro, because obviously the river runs through here as well, hence the name. Could be further south in Ukraine on the shores of the Black Sea, that Odessa villa looking out over the sea. Whatever it happens to be, we're going to have that done in depth to give you a direction about where to go and how the whole process works here. Also going to cover how to overcome the language barrier, how to take advantage of the big business opportunities as well, because a lot of things that have been done and validated in the West have not quite arrived here in Ukraine. So there definitely are some big business opportunities for you. And you also need to know what to do in the case of a medical emergency. And actually there are a lot of really attractive prices here. This actually gets a lot of medical tourism nowadays as well, Ukraine, because you can get medical procedures done for a fraction of the cost of the West. But of course you also need to have a plan in place in case you have an emergency, because you are in a foreign country and you do have that language barrier, as well as a different institutional framework and how the medical system is set up. Anyways, it's all down below. You can go take a look at that. In addition, you should be on, if you're not already, on my free mailing list. That's where I communicate with my most loyal fans. I release my new programs, my new premium programs to them first. I don't do it here on YouTube. So to get notified of those, you need to be on the mailing list. So if you haven't done that, there's a free gift below. I'm going to give you the Czars hotspots to Odessa, Kiev, and Minsk in neighboring Belarus. It's completely free. Go and type in your email address down below, and then you confirm your email. You get that guide as a free gift from me, and then in the future you also will receive the notifications and emails from me about my new premium products. And I'm actually probably going to be developing one. I've been developing it for basic Russian. That's obviously going to be a big help for guys who want to move to Eastern Europe in general, or travel around here and overcome that language barrier. Oh, someone has decided to make some noise. So I'll leave it there. Trust you've enjoyed this more philosophical video. I think a little bit about the sense of freedom that I've been enjoying for the last year here in Ukraine. To you and your freedom, do svidaniya, do pobachення from Dnipro in the center of free Ukraine.
Czar Experience.